I created this series because I'm constantly asked to speak or attend seminars, and the question that I get from young people who are beginning their careers is, how do they get started? How did I get started? What advice do they have? Do I have for them? What can they do? What steps can they take? What can they learn from what I've learned? And I'm delighted to pay it forward in this series of interviews. And I'm extremely delighted for my second interview of this series to be talking to not only a very close friend, but one of the most talented writers and producers in Hollywood who has created $2 billion franchises off of his brilliant writing. Ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Davis.
Hello.
Hi, Jeff.
Thank you for that very flattering intro.
Well, as Muhammad Ali once said, it ain't bragging if it's true. So I really appreciate your being on this interview and passing along your wealth of experiences and advice and knowledge. We've talked about this subject many times ourselves, and to get started, I would just like to ask you to share with the audience how you got started in the business.
Well, I was definitely not an overnight success. More like a 10-year success. I moved to Los Angeles right after college, and I drove cross country in this piece of crap Subaru that had no air conditioning and only one window would go down. I think I had $500 to my name. And I had few job prospects. A friend of my brother's who I could stay with in a small room in his house in the valley. And I just basically moved out on a whim, thinking to myself, I want to make it in Hollywood. I want to be a screenwriter and director. And from there, I got a bunch of jobs, like some of the worst jobs you could possibly imagine. Like temp jobs and accounts payable in Disney, where I would basically open envelopes and timestamp them for 8 hours a day, making $10 an hour.
That sounds pretty bad.
Yeah. So I spent a long time working a lot of bad day jobs while writing. And one of my longest running jobs was I was the IT guy at a talent agency. And I would spend all day there trying to keep the computers running for the agents and drive home. I'd get home after traffic about 8:30 some nights, and I'd sit down and desperately force myself to write. And I would write on the weekends. I would write during my lunch break. I would sneak in some writing whenever the work was light. And I wrote as many scripts as I could possibly write in the shortest amount of time possible. And it wasn't until entering a couple screenplay contests that I finally got noticed by a manager and got my first manager. That was sort of how I got in, through these contests. There are 1,000,000,001 contests these days, and it's hard to tell the really good ones from the bad ones. But that's how I found my first manager.
That's interesting. A couple of questions that I have. It's an amazing story of just having the guts to come out here and do that. Was this something you always wanted to do? What I guess I'm trying to ask a question that may be a very flattering question, which is how did you have that courage? Where did that courage come from to pursue your dream? And how scared were you on a scale of 1 to 10, of taking that leap?
I think I had a lot of youthful arrogance, probably. I thought to myself, I've written a lot. I can do this. I know how to entertain people, and I'll just keep trying. And I think it definitely was a dream. That's one of the hardest parts is when you know what your dream is and you're not quite sure how to fulfill it, or you know exactly how to fulfill it, you wonder to yourself, am I ever going to get there? Like I gave myself until 30 to sell a screenplay, which seemed like plenty of time to me.
And how old were you when you gave yourself to 30? What age were you at that point?
I think I was 20.
Well, that's pretty good. That was a decade.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you were being generous with yourself, giving yourself a lot of leeway
yeah.
there. Yeah.
Breathing room.
And at what age did you end up selling your first screenplay?
Well, one of the first things I needed to learn was that when you think you've sold a screenplay, you haven't really. You've maybe got your material optioned. And the first time I ever got paid for a script was right out of grad school. I went to USC grad school, and my manager was working for a producer, and she gave him the script, and he read it, and he optioned it for $5,000. It gave me a nice little trade break in one tiny little column in Variety, and that was a feature script called, at that point it was called Indelible. And it was this fast-paced thriller about a husband and wife who try to track down the man who murdered their daughter. And it was a chase movie. I was very proud of it. And but I got paid nothing for it. And most people think when they come to Hollywood, they sell a script and they can quit their job. I couldn't quit my job for years.
Really?
Years and years.
I had no idea. I did not know that. I honestly didn't. That's fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
One of the stories I really like telling is I was an IT administrator for a company that worked at Fox, and I was working in the basement of Fox when I was actually on the cover of Variety, having sold a pitch to Paramount with William Friedkin attached to direct it. And that was a book. It was called Book of Skulls by Robert Silverberg, and I was super excited about it. And so I left work in the middle of the day during my lunch hour, walked over to the studio store at Fox, bought 3 copies, and then came back to work. And then I spent the rest of the afternoon helping unload computer boxes from UPS and putting little barcode stickers on the sides of the computers, and then taking them back up.
If I didn't know you were telling the truth, I would think that you're describing a scene from the sequel to La La Land, because it just sounds too impossibly ironic, but at the same time, I think it's very inspiring to people that are trying out, because I think there still is this fantasy of, boom, you just go from your Subaru to your Bentley, and not realizing that at the beginning, even after the first couple of opportunities, there's still the struggle.
Yeah.
Jeff, one of the fun things about Haps is that we're on live with people from all over the world. So they're all like in the comments section, they're saying hello. We've got hello from, oh my gosh, it's Branson, Nashville, Edinburgh, Cleveland, Sydney, Lincoln, Clearwater, Tampa, hiya mate coming down from Australia. Hello from Raleigh. Hello from LA. People are delighted to see you on here. Jeff, looking back, what was the hardest part about getting started? What were some of the obstacles you encountered beyond the, sort of hard work and having to work 2 jobs, which, by the way, is difficult. I think it's especially difficult to maintain a long day job and then to come back and write creatively, because your energy is so spent. But you seem to have overcome that. Or was that a big obstacle? And what, if any, were some others that you contended with?
Oh, it was hell, getting the energy up. I mean, so many weekends of my 20s were spent saying no to my friends. I can't go to the beach. I've got to sit here and write 10 pages. I remember I would sometimes I'd take a nap in my car in the Fox studio lot and wake up sweating in my car because it got really hot in the summers, and then think, oh God, I got to go back to work. And I haven't written any notes down. So there was a constant struggle of trying to pay the bills, but also trying to write. I mean, it's no different from many people who get their start. And I mean, I personally love hearing stories of people who were absolutely flat broke and sleeping on their friends' couches while they were writing their screenplay that suddenly sold for $1 million. But I was writing stuff that I sold, like the pitch for Paramount. And I can say this, I only I got paid $75,000 to write that script, and I eventually got paid $75,000 to not write that script because
How so?
Jim Jacks, the producer, decided to write the script himself. And when the producer decides to write the script themselves, that's a pretty odd situation for a writer to be in.
I can imagine. Yes.
Yeah. But it took a year for Paramount to pay me that, which means I couldn't quit my job.
Right.
And it wasn't enough. That 75,000 wasn't going to be enough to pay my rent, my college loans, my USC loans, and support me. So I needed to be an IT guy for quite a while. I actually remember coming back from shooting the pilot for Criminal Minds, and I did my taxes. So we had just spent a month in Vancouver freezing our asses off. I came back, felt really good about the pilot, and then I did my taxes and realized I owed about $30,000 and I only had $15,000 in the bank. So I was like, this pilot needs to go.
Well, that seems to have worked out well, but that's interesting that there was that financial jeopardy as well. I'm actually surprised to hear that. Tell me, did you have mentors along the way? Were there people who advised you? And looking back, was the advice spot on, or did the advice sometimes take you off the track?
You know, there's a lot of advice given to writers. I mean, to go back to your previous question, like what was one of the hardest parts of starting out? For a writer, one of the hardest things is to simply get someone to read your script. Nobody wants to read your script in Hollywood.
So true.
There's a good reason for it, because your script is probably kind of terrible. So most writers out there, they're not passing around the best draft possible. They're passing around something they think is going to sell, or they want desperately to sell. My mentors came in the form of friends, but I had my managers, my agent. They're the ones who are supposed to be your mentors, but sometimes they give really bad advice. And that's why you sometimes hear writers becoming successful and switching agents and managers. I'm lucky in that my managers I've had for a very long time. They're great people. And it's kind of a funny story how I met them, because I was trying to find a job within the industry. I was struggling to get anyone to read my script. And I was interviewing to be an assistant to a producer of this production company / management company. And I wanted to be assistant to a producer. And the manager said, well, we don't want to hire you, but we hear you write scripts. We'd like to read your script. And so that's how I got my manager that way. And I've been with the three of them ever since. And they have been great as mentors as well. You find mentors along the way. I mean, one of my best mentors throughout my career, as someone I've known for over 15 years now, is you. Oh. So, yeah.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. I'm extremely honored. You do stand out to me in many ways as someone that I've had the privilege to advise, because what I haven't found common among people that say they want to be writers is the level of industry that you applied to it, and the level of excellence that you held yourself to. So often I'll read a script, and now we've probably read so many scripts by so many new writers, and it's always a friend that says, oh, I've got a friend and they really want you to read their script. They really want you to read their script. And I always ask, have you read it? And they'd be like, well, no, I haven't, because I'm not, I'm like, well, why don't you read it? And you tell me if you think it's so good that it's worth sharing. Because if it isn't, and so many times I really hate this role that I sometimes play, is to say as gently and constructively as possible, you know what, this isn't very good. Like, let me explain to you why. Like one friend of mine who actually went on to become a very successful writer, he's still plying his craft today, and he's does very well at it. He sent me a Cheers spec script when I was a baby executive, and it was some of the best character and joke writing that I'd ever read in a Cheers spec script, but there was literally no story at all. I mean, literally none. Now, in that case, I actually enjoyed giving him suggestions because I said, you know what, this dialogue is really funny and you really know those characters and you write them well, but you need to go learn how to write a story. And there's some resources, you can read some books, but that's the missing piece of your, and I try to look for whatever there's a spark of something great, and you can build from there and say, well, try to work on this aspect or that aspect or improve this or that. The worst situations are the ones where you can't find any spark at all, and it's just it's material that isn't any good.
And you make a lot of suggestions on you could take this class. Or
exactly. And you don't want to be somebody who's killing someone's dream. You don't want to like discourage somebody, but you also don't want to do them the disservice of giving them falsely positive feedback. That's the balance. I want to just acknowledge more of our audience members. We've got a hello from Seattle. One of our top commenters, Helen Wallace, said, "We all think we're invincible and nothing seems impossible when we're young. Naivety is a wonderful thing. Wish we could return that self-belief as we get older." I think Jeff and I would both agree with you. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
We've got Oklahoma City in the house. We have Wisconsin in the house. We've got some nice feedback from Peter Bittner, who's telling us that this is incredibly insightful. Hello from New Delhi. What a wonderful hello that is. I'm wishing that I could I could visit New Delhi someday. I guess we'll all be traveling sometime soon. When others, Jeff, ask you got started your way. If you felt that there was a best way to get started doing what you are doing now, is there a best way? Are there multiple pathways? Have you seen other people do it very differently? But what advice would you give them about the method?
Specifically for writers, I do always give one piece of advice, and that is if plan A is to be a writer in Hollywood, don't have a plan B. There is no better motivation than starvation. It's
wow.
Mostly what will get you in a writing career is your day job that becomes your actual career. And you've got to go all in as a writer in Hollywood, I think. You must live in LA. There are a lot of people who say, can I be a writer and not live in LA? And I'm like, sure. It's going to be a lot harder because this is a town of connections, and it's a town of eventually getting in front of other people and pitching your ideas. That was one of the hardest things for me to learn as a writer, that I couldn't just sit behind my computer and write, that I was eventually going to have to get in front of a room of 7 people sometimes who were sitting there all staring at me, waiting to hear a brilliant story. Mm-hmm. And at a certain point, I was like, I'm not a pitcher. I can't do this. I'm just a writer. I just want to stay home and write. And my managers and agents were like, you've got to get out there. This is how you sell stuff. This is called development.
That was excellent advice. I'm glad that those managers and agents were so honest with you, because they could have indulged you and said, sure, just, be a recluse and we'll somehow figure out how to get this done for you.
Mm-hmm. There are some writers who do that. There are a few very highly paid writers who will not pitch because they are terrible at it. I've also heard of certain writers going into like TV pitches, and they have their pitch held here in paper form, and they will sit there and just read it aloud. And they've sold stuff that way. If it's good enough, you can sell it. But
well,
eventually.
Yeah, but you know what's interesting? This is so. Would you call yourself an introvert, Jeff?
I'm an extrovert, introverted extrovert. I've had to force myself to become an extrovert.
That's why I ask, because I actually think it's inspiring. I think in your heart of hearts, you are an introvert, and I think you've just realized, you know what? Get over it. You gotta just get out there and do it. And I think that is the truth. It's interesting that I didn't know this, that it was advice that you give, but I give the same advice to people about Hollywood. I say, you've got to move here, and you've got to move here because you need to circulate in these currents, and you need to bump into people at Starbucks, and you need to go to parties where other people are trying to do what you're doing, because you never know where those opportunities, and also you're going to learn it's going to accelerate your learning when you're talking about the whole process.
Yeah.
About your pitching, I'm going to just make an observation I think the audience might find helpful about this process, which is on the other side of it. I think that sometimes there's almost an inverse correlation between how well people pitch and how well people can actually execute. So you don't have to feel bad if you're not the best pitcher in the world.
It's quite true.
But there's something that happens because, I was privileged to do a show with Susan Harris. Susan Harris is not a spectacular pitcher. She's very matter of fact.
Yeah.
But you also are listening to her pitch in context. And for somebody who's a young executive who really knows who's talented and who they're trying to, persuade to do a show, when Susan Harris comes into our office, believe me, we were all reverential. We were all like, what is this lady who has created some of the funniest characters in history and has written some of the funniest dialogue ever? What's she pitching? Because we're going to give her the benefit of the doubt that this is going to be really good. And I remember when she said, and she was almost a little variation of what you're describing, the reading off the script, saying, and there's a character, because we pitched her 3 older women living together in a condo in Miami. And she's like, I really like that area. And she came back with an entire pitch and she said, and there's a 4th character. The 4th character is the mother of Dorothy. And she's 80 years old and she had a stroke and it destroyed the part of her brain that censors what she says. And we listened to that and we were like, oh my God, can you imagine what Susan Harris is going to do with this character? So part of it is you're giving a chance for other development executives and producers and creative people to just experience you as a human being and then feel a connection to you. And like, it's like dating. Like, okay, now I want to work with you because not only have I read your material, but now I understand the human being, the thinking, breathing, creative entity, and I could see working with this person, so it's interesting how it does kind of fall back to that feeling of having a human connection.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to live in Hollywood. That the giant sign on the hill still says Hollywood.
That's right. That's right. And you can hike right beside it if you decide to have the courage to come out here and do that. So you had mentioned in passing in one of your answers books. Are there any books that you would recommend that were very helpful to you? And do you have sort of a reading list you give aspiring writers and producers?
I'm always actually, as a writer myself, I believe that you should always be learning. So I'm always listening to podcasts and reading new books. The first one I ever read on screenwriting, which actually made me want to write a screenplay, was Adventures in the Screen Trade by William Goldman, which is the classic, of course.
The classic.
Yeah. A lot of famous quotes from that book.
Tell us a couple. I'll let you say my favorites because I know you know them.
The most famous, of course, from that book would be Nobody Knows Anything.
Which is so true.
Which is, those 3 words basically define Hollywood. As much as anyone will tell you in Hollywood that our audience likes this or our audience likes that, nobody has a clue. Nobody has a clue what's going to make a hit movie. Nobody has a clue what's going to make a hit TV show. And I actually, the greatest thing about that saying is it's not only true about the executives, it's true about the viewer. The viewer doesn't know what they want to watch either. If you had told me years ago that my favorite drama TV show of all time would have been about a high school teacher dealing crystal meth, I would have told you, no way. I don't like drug shows. I don't like mafia shows. I don't like drug shows. But Breaking Bad was one of the most amazing TV shows ever written, and I could not get enough of it. I didn't know that was going to be one of my favorite shows. I didn't know that Mad Men, a show about ad executives in the 50s, would have been one of my favorite shows. But it was. You never know what you're going to get. So those books, they're great when they give you little bits and pieces of advice like that. I mean, one of the problems of screenwriting books and one of the problems of all of these things is that they'll whittle everything down to a formula, and you think that you have to abide by that formula. Whether it's the hero's journey or whether it's the sequence method, which I learned at USC. But these are really all things that you kind of apply later on to a rewrite even. When you're sitting down to write, you've got to write from passion, and you've got to write from, every time I sit down to write, I always ask myself, what are the scenes I want to see?
Right.
And that's always one of the biggest pieces of advice I give to writers. Is one of the big mistakes young writers make is they write a script to sell a script. And you've got to write a script to be a movie or a TV show that you would want to watch. And that's one of the strangest things to me about writers. They'll sit down and they won't write the show that they want to see. There's this great, everybody knows the old maxim, write what you know. I personally disagree with that. Yes, maybe when you're starting out, write what you know, because you'll work from situations, from characters based on real people, from situations in your life, and there will be truth to it. But when you become a little better, when you're a little more confident as a writer, don't write what you know. Write what you love. And if what you love is epic sci-fi, like Dune, one of my favorite novels of all time, write Dune.
Mm-hmm.
What you love is horror movies, write a horror movie. Write something that'll scare the living hell out of people. James Cameron, when he was asked about writing Aliens, he said he sat down to write the movie that he would have killed to see as a 14-year-old kid.
What a great description of that. Yeah. That's fantastic. And I think, the other reason for that is kind of a common sense reason in my observation, which is these things are inevitably very hard. It's hard to write. It's hard to write really well. It's hard to rewrite. It's hard to sell. It's hard to do those pitch meetings. It really helps if you have this enormous drive behind you to overcome all those obstacles. And the only way you have that drive is if you have that passion of like, I am dying to make this. I remember once asking a very famous director for some advice, because I had aspirations to direct a film. And he said, his first question to me is, what's the movie that you're dying to direct? Like just sort of, and I was really, I was kind of completely stunned by the simplicity of that question, and this was coming from, because I thought it was all about being so careful, but no, it was all about passion, and that was what drove everything. I'm just going to mention some of our other audience comments here. Please, let's make the visit to New Delhi happen. That's cool. Best advice I got from a journalist was only do this if you can't see yourself doing anything else. Thanks for sharing, Jeff Davis. That is really cool. Ray of Sunshine, thanks. Bronx Viking, thanks for the comments. Yes, people are recognizing I was talking about Golden Girls. Bobby Vicker, who was a total VIP at HAPS, says hello from London. The outcome of that idea, I guess they're talking about the Golden Girls conversation. The outcome of that idea certainly led to the best ever ensemble and comedy. By the way, just as an aside, because you might enjoy it, after reading a lot of Susan Harris's work, I started realizing she just writes about three things: sex, food, and death. And literally, you can find any Susan Harris script and you can turn to any single page of it, and there will be a reference to sex, food, or death.
Cheesecake. I'm just remembering the cheesecake.
Exactly. And it was just uncanny. So she really hooked into what drove her. Yeah. Jeff, I think people are interested in the emotional roller coaster of these jobs too. What have been any high points and or low points that you'd like to share with us, on your really amazing adventure and, creating these two huge successes and and suffering, I'm sure, along the way.
Yes. I'll talk about the high points first. Those
Okay.
are more fun to remember than the low points.
Yeah, for sure.
I have to say, like one of the major high points was definitely it was pitching Criminal Minds to CBS and selling it in the room. And so, selling in the room means, for people who don't know, the executive has the power to say yes. They're going to buy. They're going to pay you. In that instant, they can say yes. We are going to pay you to write this script. So, if your quote is good, you've kind of won the lottery in that moment. You've done your day's work. And I remember I had pitched Criminal Minds to ABC, and it was terrible. I did a terrible job. I couldn't get comfortable in my chair. I kept stumbling over my words. I was looking at the executive watching me, and she's just like, okay. You could tell she was kind of waiting for it to be over. She told me later on that she was so pissed at herself for not buying it.
I can imagine that's your worst nightmare as a development executive is I passed on Criminal Minds. It's like that line from Sunset Boulevard where the producer laments, I'm the one who passed on Gone with the Wind. I said, who wants to see another picture about the Civil War? You're like, your nightmare as an executive is you'll pass on a big hit. So imagine how that poor executive feels today, no matter what the caliber of your pitch was.
She bought my next one.
I can imagine.
But being in the room and for CBS, it was, I remember sitting in my car outside like 20 minutes before the meeting, before the pitch, and just kind of psyching myself up and kept imagining in my head this faceless executive. I knew it was a female, Laverne McKinnon, actually. I'd never met her, but I just imagined her listening to the pitch, liking it, and over I thought to myself, I imagined her saying, I love it. I love it. So I went in, I started the pitch, and I was calm. I was in it. I was telling the story like it was a campfire and it was a bunch of people listening to me tell a midnight tale. And I knew I had her. And at a certain moment, I finished the pilot, describing what the pilot was going to be. And I said to her, I have other ideas for more episodes. Would you like to hear them? And she said, no, I love it. And my producer, Mark Gordon, sitting there right next to me, said, don't say another word, we're leaving.
Mark Gordon, there's a reason he's as successful as he is.
Yeah.
Good for him. That's fantastic.
I remember sort of just floating my way to the elevator with the executives, and a friend of yours there was with us, Morgan Wendell, and he looks over and he says to me, this is going to be our CSI.
Wow. And how prescient was that?
Yeah.
Oh my God. That is just unbelievable. By the way, I have a healthy ego about my own pitching abilities. Mm-hmm. You pitched me, I don't know if you remember this, but you pitched me the entire pilot story of Criminal Minds on a hike in Runyon Canyon. And literally I'm like, I've never pitched anything as well as you've pitched that. How did you get so damn good at pitching? Practice?
Oh, it was practice because I was terrible at it. My first pitch, I didn't know quite what to do. I asked my manager, how do I do this? He said, make sure it's no longer than 15 minutes. 10 minutes really is what you want to do. Just go through the story, through the big beats, the trailer moments. And I got into this pitch, and it was for a rewrite job of a feature film. And I stumbled. I was like sweating. I was pouring sweat. I had my pages. At one point I said, sorry, I forgot something. Let me go back. And the producer reached over at a certain point, touched my leg and said, don't worry, you're doing fine. And when someone says that to you in a pitch, you're not doing fine.
Which is so Hollywood, by the way, for them to say the exact opposite.
Yeah.
What the truth is. Oh, dear.
So I left that meeting and I was angry. I called my manager up and I said, I'm terrible at this. And he said, I know, I just heard. I was on the phone with the producer.
Oh dear.
not getting
Oh,
the job.
that hurts.
So I said to myself, if this is what I have to do, I have to get good at it. And so I realized, for me, I can't pitch off the cuff in a room. I have to. Sorry about that.
That's okay. It's all
I
good.
have to. That's the first time that's happened during one of these. I have to be good at a pitch. I have to know. I have to know it like a script. And so what I did was, I wrote it out like a script, the whole pitch, and I memorized it. And I would watch myself I would record myself on the computer. Um, and hold on, let me turn that off for God's sake.
Quite all right.
Um, so I would watch myself on a computer doing QuickTime videos, and I would practice over and over again until I could do it like a performance.
That's interesting that you recorded yourself.
Yeah.
That's a very methodical way to actually improve. Fascinating.
Yeah. And I would watch myself and I'd be like, oh, I'm kind of boring there. I need to speed up here. I need to stop touching my face like that. So I got good. I treated it like it was a performance. And I still do that to this day. I never go in without having almost completely memorized an entire pitch. And my pitches, by the way, are not 10 minutes. These days, your pitches should be around 20 minutes. Mine mostly last 30 minutes, sometimes 40. But I'm at a certain point in my career where I can say they can sit there and listen to me.
Right, exactly. Well, they should. Now, I am utterly fascinated, just as you would understand from the title of this series, by the inception of things. Mm-hmm. And I would love to know, because I don't know, what was the inception of Criminal Minds? When and where were you when you first thought, you know what, maybe I'll do I guess you'd call it a procedural, right? And when and where and why? How did it come about, if you remember?
Well, Criminal Minds was interesting because I had been writing outlines to do Criminal Minds as a feature spec script. I had gotten really into reading books about criminal profiling. And I was in love with it. All the real psychology behind it, the science behind it. There was so much there that I didn't know about, and I was so fascinated by it. And it was basically it was just a thriller, always a thriller, because you never knew if they would stop or if they would kill again. And that's the thing about serial killers, is they don't stop. So I'd been fascinated about it, and I was trying to come up with an idea for a feature. And at the time, I had been developing feature scripts. I'd been writing feature scripts. I'd sold to Paramount, sold something to Dimension, and nothing was getting made. And I was really getting incredibly frustrated with the feature film business. I always described myself as a failed feature writer. And so I said, finally, well, they're not making stuff in feature films, they make stuff in TV. They have to fill those time slots. Maybe I'll try doing this as a TV show. And there had been FBI profiling shows like Profiler, but if you watch that, they never included all the really cool psychological stuff like the Homicidal Triad, which was these 3 behaviors that many serial killers seem to exhibit in childhood, which is fire starting, cruelty to animals, and bedwetting, and uresis. And that's in the pilot of Criminal Minds. So the genesis of it really was, 1, a fascination with all the research, and 2, being so incredibly frustrated with feature films and not getting anything made that I decided I'm going to make this a TV series. And I pitched it to my agent. She said, okay, let's pitch this to a couple producers. And at the time, Mark Gordon had just really been getting his TV company going, and he needed projects. And his executive, Deb Spera, heard the pitch, loved it. I pitched it to Mark, and we got going off of it right there. It was sort of crazy how it all happened.
Interesting, yeah. By the way, Gracel Gerber has said, I'm amazed that the same mind that created Criminal Minds created Teen Wolf, such versatility of a great writer's mind. I guess that's the perfect segue to ask you about the inception, getting started, if you will, on on Teen Wolf? Why? Because a lot of people you wouldn't necessarily think the guy who's going to create Criminal Minds would create Teen Wolf. How is it? What is it about Jeff Davis that those two things both existed in your wheelhouse?
Well, I consider myself a genre writer, and I love all genre. So whether it's sci-fi, horror, or suspense, I mean, Criminal Minds can also be seen as a horror show, but Teen Wolf was really fun because I wasn't going to do it unless I could add humor to it. I wanted to be funny. I wanted to flex some comedy muscles as well. And Teen Wolf really came about because they were developing it as a reboot at MTV. And I had a meeting with them, just a general meeting, and they mentioned Teen Wolf. And I had been working with two other producers, Marty Adelstein and Michael Thorne. Michael Thorne, who is now the president of Fox. And they said, it looks like we're going to be attached to Teen Wolf. Would you be interested in doing it? I said, well, let me have a meeting and talk to them about it. And so I said to MTV, I said, how do you guys want to do this? Because I don't know if you've seen the original Teen Wolf movie lately, but it's not really a werewolf movie. Mm-hmm. It's a basketball movie. And it's sort of a goofy comedy. And they said, no, we want to do it sort of scary, suspenseful, and sexy. And so I was thinking to myself, they want Twilight. Okay, the one thing I didn't want to do was a Twilight ripoff. Mm-hmm. What I did want to do was something more along the lines of one of my other favorite 80s movies, The Lost Boys. And so I said to them, what if it's kind of like The Lost Boys, which is a sexy, scary, suspenseful movie, but that also has humor. It has a great twist ending. So that was sort of the paradigm we went for. And when I sat down to write it, I was sitting with one of the producers, and we were talking about it. And we said, this is really kind of a Peter Parker story. It's sort of a Spider-Man story, sort of a teenager gaining superpowers. Of all the sexuality and stuff in it, about werewolves and that being a sort of metaphor for teenage angst and teenage hormones, I sat down and basically wrote a superhero story, which I wanted to do. And I was able to write a story about two best friends and find Dylan O'Brien and Tyler Posey, who turned out to be just amazingly good together. The chemistry they had was great. And now watching them turn into celebrities and stars is it's crazy.
Must be a little surreal. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. Do you see other people who are breaking in? You've mentored people I know, and we've had so many different friends, some of whom have made it spectacularly well, and some, fizzle out. What are the mistakes that you see people make when they're trying to break in?
For writers, a very specific mistake, and something that they just repeat over and over again, is writing a script that they think Hollywood wants to see and will greenlight. You can't do that.
Rather than something that's coming from a place of passion.
Yeah, I think that piece of advice always gets confused because when you tell a writer to write what you know, it's like telling them, write a lovable little indie movie. But that's not true. It's like we can't all break in through quirky indie movies, and we get the Hollywood dream. And not all of us want to sit down and write Little Miss Sunshine. I don't think I could.
Right.
I like stuff that's fast-paced. I like action. I like suspense. But when I sat down to write, I was writing exactly what I wanted to write. The pilot for Criminal Minds and the pilot for Teen Wolf, as much as those were developed by executives and given notes by producers, those two pilots were exactly the stories I wanted to tell. And they excited me. I wanted to tell those stories. And that's the biggest mistake that writers make, is trying to sit down and write a script that they think will sell. Mm-hmm. And they think that once they sell a script, then they can write what they want. But it's not true. You're never going to get past the Hollywood gatekeepers unless you write something that galvanizes people, that makes them laugh or entertains them. You have got to sit down, and if you write a script and you hand it to someone to read, and that person tells you, I couldn't put it down, that script's going to sell. There's no way it's not going to sell.
Right. Well, that's how I felt when I heard you pitch your story. Even though I didn't see the script, I heard the story with virtually every beat intact. And I knew enough to know, wait a minute, this is in the top 1%. The top 1% gets made. And the reason the top 1% gets made is there's not enough good material to make. And I sometimes people who are outside of the industry will ask me, in conversation like, I saw that show and it's so terrible. How did it get to be so terrible? And I'm like, well, actually, there aren't that many talented people in Hollywood, really talented people. There are a lot of people who are craftsmen who can sort of crank something out, but it's, to have the craftsmanship and the talent and the inspiration and the genius and to be able to create original characters and an original story, that's really a rare thing. It's just there aren't that many LeBron Jameses. There's a lot of people that are on that second tier. Yeah. And we're in a period now where there's so much demand on creative talent. There's so many buyers. There's so many streamers right now trying to gobble up all the available talent. So whereas now I look back on, let's say, the writing staff of shows that I was on when I was a baby executive, like Cheers or Golden Girls or even Home Improvement, today, most of those writers would have their own show. Yes. There's just not enough of that talent to go around. So you can't have like a murderer's row on one show.
Yeah.
Now, and
think about the writers that were on the first 10 seasons of The Simpsons.
Oh my God! Yeah. And there's a level of excellence they're bringing to this that's just unbelievable. I do want to get back to some of the comments here. We've got all sorts of people giving us shout outs. Hello from LA. I saw back there. So one of our viewers is pointing out that 12 seasons of Criminal Minds are now available on Netflix. Is that true, Jeff? All 12 seasons? Good Lord.
12 seasons on Netflix. I think all of them are available on Paramount Plus. 6 seasons of Teen Wolf on Amazon Prime, but actually Hulu will be getting all 6 seasons of Teen Wolf in a week, I think. So it's really nice because it gives these shows a whole other life. Oh. I mean, Criminal Minds is actually one of the top streaming shows, which is very good for my bank account.
Yes, but bless the viewers. It's a beautiful thing. Mailbox money, as they say.
Yes.
Tell me, what was in Teen Wolf? You were the showrunner and the creator.
Yeah.
How did that role differ? What were the sort of challenges, and what are the best and worst aspects for you personally of that job?
It's a difficult job. David Mamet has a great quote about TV. He says, writing a feature is like running a marathon. Working on a TV show, writing a TV show is like running until you die. And it's really
fantastic. That is so brilliant. Of course, it's Mamet, so we should expect that, but good gracious.
Wow. It's the amount of work it takes is extraordinary. I remember when they ordered 24 episodes for the 3rd season of Teen Wolf, we treated every episode like a mini movie. And I thought to myself, I don't know how we're going to do this, but we did. And I actually had to keep bargaining with MTV to get them to lower their episode number because they said, we want 24 episodes for season 3. And halfway through season 3, they said, we want 24 episodes for season 4 as well. And I said, there's no way I can do 24 episodes for season 4. And I said, the only way I can do season 4 is if it's 12 episodes. For season 5, I'll do 24. And they said, okay. And then for season 5, I negotiated them down from 24 to 20 because it was just so hard to keep the quality up while you're doing that many episodes. And in network TV, they have what's called the 7s. 7 good ones, 7 great ones, 7 bad ones. And I've never even heard that. That's fascinating. 21 episodes.
The 7.
and I wanted no bad ones. I didn't
Yeah.
want any episode to be bad. So it was a lot of writing, a lot of editing, being a showrunner is another. Jonah Nolan has a quote said it's like doing a crash landing of a plane once a week. Actually, one of my favorite quotes is from Lawrence Kasdan, which is being a writer is like having homework for the rest of your life. It's true.
Yeah, right. That's so true. Now, we should point out to audience members that you approached show running like, and there are showrunners that do this. You wrote most every word on that series. Is that fair to say? I mean, there were some people
Yeah.
that were helping, but
I
you
had,
were putting your personal,
yeah.
hands on every line of dialogue, every scene, right?
Yes, I had a writing staff, but the level of rewrites I did was a little bit crazy, a little bit of like treating myself like an auteur, I guess.
Right.
It's just partly because it was a show that was very specific to my voice. Like it was hard for people to do only I could do the Styles dialogue, that came right from my own teenage years of being a sarcastic little shit. But I had something to prove. It was my first job show running, and I wanted to prove that I could do it and take on that task. And I wrote a lot in that time, and I was not aware of burnout and just how bad it could be, but it does hit you. For someone who's getting into TV, my best piece of advice on starting out that way would be talk to as many other TV writers as possible, because everyone's made the same mistakes. So they make them over and over again. I remember before Teen Wolf, I took every showrunner I knew out to lunch and grilled them with questions on how to run a show and how to do the best job. And that is one of my biggest pieces of advice for anyone starting out in this business. No matter where you are, you will feel like a beginner in it. I mean, my next pilot that I'm doing, I'm attached to direct, and that will be the first pilot I've directed. So I'm definitely going to be asking for plenty of advice again from all the directors I've hired.
Yes, I much prefer learning from other people's mistakes than suffering the humiliation and indignity of making them myself, for sure. I am. Are any of those? Can you talk about anything that you're working on next, or is it top secret?
Well, the one thing I'm concentrating on this week is Eon Flux, which is a reboot of the. I don't know if you can call it a reboot, but because it's going to be pretty new. But it's based on the animated series from MTV. But I'm really looking forward to it because it's sci-fi, and sci-fi has been something I've wanted to do for quite a while. I skipped over the bad parts.
Yes, you did, but I wasn't going to press you because I didn't want to re-traumatize you, but I would be super interested, and I'm sure our audience would be as well.
I have a very highly paid therapist to help me through that. So, but some of the low points, and it's helpful to know that no matter where you are in this business, you're going to face the lowest of low points at no matter what pinnacle of success you're at. Because there will be times when you'll think your career is over, and then suddenly something happens to jolt it back to life. One of the biggest low points I had was probably after the premiere of Teen Wolf, when we got the ratings, and it was quite a bit lower than we thought it would be. And I had I knew that I wanted to temper the expectations. They put it on after the movie awards, and this was when Nielsen ratings were still a big thing, which they're not as much anymore. But I remember thinking to myself, "Oh shit, we've got to work for our audience." So we gradually gained an audience, but just by sheer force of will. but the ratings were always terrifying for me. At one point, I asked MTV to stop telling me what the ratings were because I didn't want to know. But I would always be sitting there clicking on them to find out. And then they told me just how many people were streaming the show. And I was like, well, why do you guys care about the ratings?
Yeah, right. Well, it was actually probably one of the forerunners. It was really one of those series that didn't do so well in its live broadcast, but was amazing in terms of people were DVRing this. A younger generation of viewers is like, why should I have to be in front of my TV at 8 o'clock? Why don't I just DVR it and I'll watch it when I want to watch it?
Yeah, TV. What makes a success on TV nowadays is kind of becoming like what happens to some movies. Like a lot of people look at The Princess Bride, right? And they say, oh, that's a huge hit. Everybody knows The Princess Bride and everybody loves The Princess Bride. It was a flop.
I did not remember that. I'm completely one of those people that has remembered it incorrectly. What happened?
Total flop. The studio had no idea how to market it. And it was only through TV and VHS and DVD that people found it. I mean, a lot of people don't know that Wizard of Oz was not a hit when it was first released. It was actually the Thanksgiving Day reruns that made Wizard of Oz a hit.
Interesting.
Shawshank Redemption. Yeah. Shawshank Redemption was a modest success, and now it's considered one of the top movies of all time. So TV is following in the footsteps of feature film, or those kinds of feature films, where people can discover a TV show and it can be a hit years after it was finished.
I remembered you telling me at a dinner or something we were having together that there was a show that you were watching, which you thought was one of the most brilliant shows ever made. And you said it's Breaking Bad. And because I'm in the industry, I had heard the title, but no one was watching it. And those numbers were just so tiny and so modest, I think, for the first 3 seasons, right?
Nobody was watching it for at least the first 2.
Yeah. And yet the quality was fantastic from episode 1. So it was, in this new media environment, something you could go back and discover. And I give a lot of props to the executives over there that they had the wisdom to realize that they were onto something and that this was a valuable asset, even though they didn't quite have the viewership yet.
They didn't have enough product on their channel, so they had to keep it.
Yeah, right. That also helps. Exactly. I want to acknowledge some more audience people. We've got hello from Indianapolis, Brad Llewellyn. We have hello, David and Jeff. Blessings to both of you in abundance. From Edward Lynn. And we have, there was a greetings from St. Petersburg. And when you're on Haps, you never know whether that's Florida or Russia. But thank you, Des, for the appreciation award. We've got Rev. Thank you for your compliments. We've it's a lot of people really enjoying the wisdom you're sharing here, Jeff. You did say something else earlier that I wanted to just follow up with. And that is, you were talking about how intense the burnout was on those marathons that turn deadly, to use your metaphor. How did you cope with that? Did you have how did you cope with the extreme burnout, the extreme stress? It's episode 19. You're getting to the finish line, but you're just feeling despair from how exhausted you are. What did you do? How did you practice self-care, or how did you get through it?
Well, I think I'm still learning self-care, even at 45, because I keep telling myself I'm not going to do that on the next one. But
right.
Delegating, learning to not be such a perfectionist, that has one of my biggest problems as a writer is I've always been such a perfectionist. I write scripts to be read. Well, a lot of people write scripts to be just blueprints for a movie. I kind of come from the Quentin Tarantino school of thought, where I want the script itself to be a reading experience. So I want someone to be able to read one of my scripts and feel like they've had the experience without it being a movie. And Tarantino does that really well. James Cameron does that. His scripts are beautifully written. Shane Black was well known for writing scripts that had were a great reading experience. But it's a lot of what you have to let go of is perfectionism, and that is something I still struggle with. And if I don't get better at it, it will lead to another burnout, most likely. So, but really, what I'm trying to do is never ever again produce 24 episodes in one season. There was no coming back from that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I consider season 3 of Teen Wolf the best season. So there was something about it that we were firing on all cylinders then, and we were really going for it. And at a certain point with TV, the network executives stop hammering you with notes and sort of let you do what you want. And so by season 3, we were doing whatever we wanted. And
Yeah.
it was great fun. That's the best thing about TV, is that if you reach a certain level of success, they leave you alone, and you can do what you want, and you can try weird things and make crazy episodes. If they're weird bottle episodes like the Fly episode in Breaking Bad, who cares? You've got another 20 more coming. So
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
that TV.
Well, Jeff, we've actually had an hour already, so I'm going to try to wrap it up pretty quickly. But I do want to say, I do want to acknowledge a couple more questions. One was interesting that I think you would enjoy answering, from Brett Stover.
Mhm.
What was your learning curve in dealing with talent? What an interesting question, because that's, of course, so much of what being a showrunner is.
Well, it was interesting. My first experience with real talent was Mandy Patinkin on Criminal Minds. And he was such an extraordinary person. He would actually sing to me over the phone. He'd say something, he'd be trying to give me some feedback on a script, and he'd say, Sondheim said it best. And then he'd start singing.
Wow, that's cool.
Managing talent it's tough to do, especially when you're on a show that's a hit and the actor says, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to go do movies now. And you say, well, we'll make time for you to do movies. Please do at least 20 more episodes with us. And you can go off and do the movie during the summer when we're off. It's a lot about managing egos. It's a lot about managing insecurity. We could do a whole other hour or 2 or 3 on just managing talent. But for a showrunner, you are really the CEO of a company. And you're not only dealing with talent, you're dealing with the crew, you're dealing with your writers, you're dealing with post-production editors. So all of a sudden, you take these writers who have been sitting at home alone, and you're making them the CEOs of these companies, which manage sometimes 150 people, as well as dealing with network executives breathing down your neck. So it's a steep learning curve, I will say, very steep. But exciting as well when you do it right.
Cool. One last question I'm going to pass along from one of our best HAPS hosts, Rev McInnes. Do ratings even factor into whether a series gets canceled anymore? How is the premature death of a series determined in these days that have left television to live in the history books?
That's a good question, and that's a question that I think no one's able to quite answer yet. For broadcast networks, yes, ratings still mean a lot. For the streamers, not necessarily. For cable, not necessarily. For like CW, they do a certain number in ratings, but their shows are also on Netflix, and sometimes they can be huge hits on Netflix. A lot of people think of Riverdale as a Netflix show and don't know that it's on the CW. So it's a very different landscape now. Ratings aren't the same thing as they used to be. Because, I mean, you and I both remember, if you wanted to watch a TV show, you had to be there that night. I remember telling people Sunday nights I couldn't hang out with them because that was X-Files. And there was no way I was going to miss the X-Files. But now if I want to watch all 10 or 12 seasons of the X-Files, I'll do it at the convenience my own time.
Yes. I mean, the fact that we're having to wait every week for the Woody Allen versus Mia new episode to get released, I find like intrinsically offensive. Like, wait a minute, why don't you just give them all to me at once? You know, the instant gratification has become the habit now, and with how so many streamers are doing it. Jeff, you have been so generous with your time and your wisdom and insights. It's a pleasure for me. I know you very well, and I've learned all sorts of things that I didn't know until this conversation. So thank you. Is there anything else you want to tell the audience before we call it a night?
No, thank you for being here, and thank you for letting me talk about writing and getting started. It makes me very nostalgic for the old days. But thank you for talking about this, and it's a pleasure always to talk to you, David. You know that.
Thanks so much, Jeff, and likewise, thank you all. You can follow us at HAPS. We're on all the social media platforms, and I'd like to thank Jeff Davis again, and thank my producer, Pablo De La Hoya, who's done a great job off camera, and my good friend Brett Stover helping us and observing backstage as well. Thank you all, and I look forward to sharing further installments of Getting Started with you.
Thanks, guys.